Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Nigeria and China have reaffirmed commitment to strengthening their partnership, with President Bola Tinubu urging Beijing to expand its $2 billion currency swap agreement to boost trade and development. During talks with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Abuja, Tinubu also called for a review of China's aid package to Africa, citing the continent's growing infrastructural needs. Wang Yi also had bilateral talks with his Nigerian counterpart. Well, joining us on the show this morning to discuss how this agreement would help reduce reliance on the US dollar, stabilize Nigeria's foreign reserves while spurring trade and investments between the two nations, and to what degree it should be expanded, is Professor Ken Ife, Nigerian economist and lead consultant on private sector development to the ECOWAS Commission. Good morning and welcome to the program, Professor.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Ayo and Vimbai. Thank you very much for having me.
Good morning. Good morning,
well,
sir.
Thank you for joining us, Prof. First, let's start with the controversy. I'm aware that Mr. Femi Falana, SAN, has written a number of letters raising questions about this currency swap between Nigeria and China. And his main point is that the IMF and the World Bank have been trying to frustrate this. He has made a freedom of information request with regard to this. The government has replied to say that it's still valid. Now there's information that even the Chinese are saying it is still valid. But what Mr. Falana is saying basically is that what is Nigeria benefiting from this? Because the transactions are not in Naira. So those are the issues. If you could just, by way of introduction, take us through some of those questions that have been raised by Mr. Femi Falana about the viability of this idea, and now Nigeria could benefit from it, considering the fact that we're dealing with two unequal economic partners in this space.
Okay, first of all, in 2016, China joined the IMF basket of currencies. There were 4. They made it number 5. Yuan now became a very important currency. Not that, it was well deserved for many years. China has remained the biggest exporter in the world of products, all kinds of products and services. Now, the currency swap, by definition, actually tries to facilitate trade. It tries to improve trade, our trade volumes between the two countries. It also helps in reducing transaction costs. And transaction costs can be as much as 20% when you go through the dollar. You incur 10% because on your side going out, and then you incur 10% on their side coming in. When a Chinese manufacturer quotes for the goods in renminbi, if he wants to quote it in dollar, he tends to add 10% or more because of exchange risks. So it actually gets more expensive. So just put that by the side. Those are the 3 main issues around that. But coming to the situation that we had before, what we inherited was bouts of macroeconomic instability, high interest rates, high inflation, unstable forex situation we had multiple exchange rates, and then crippling debt, which hasn't escaped us. Now we're still with those. But what has happened now over time is that from 2018, when we first did the first swap for 2.5 billion, we had to maintain a reserve. We have about 4.5% of our reserve is in renminbi. Now, so we need to have that for them to agree to what we are doing. And then what we have now decided then was to run this for 3 years and see how that goes. But remember, at the time of 2018, our dollar to naira was 305 naira to a dollar. That whole situation has changed dramatically. 2 things have happened. One is that we have a much more acceptable macroeconomic, something you can live with. The macroeconomic indices of today, we can probably live with those. And they have a lot of merits. One, you have positive trade balance of over 5 trillion. We have positive balance of the payment of over $5.8 billion. we have narrow window of what was 5 exchange rates or more. We now have convergence in those exchange rates. You now have 2, but there is convergence. And that convergence also means that there's an alignment. But there may be small difference, but that is a confidence booster for you to go back to China and say, let's do something. Because they now see that there is some handle on our forex rates. And then hopefully, it will improve rather than degrade. So they can do that now. Many other things, I think our inflation rates have gone even higher, but there is the likelihood that it could be tempered by middle of this year, and it could begin to come down towards the third quarter of this year. So some of those macroeconomic indices that could raise concern, because they will come back on our discussion on risks. You will see those appearing towards the end of our discussion. I will do the macroeconomic risk, because that is the final part of this discussion. So coming to your question about, because the second question is, what do you use this money for? What is it for? One is that we have infrastructure. Infrastructure makes a call on this swap currency. Number 2 is that we have capital goods that we import. And those capital goods, a lot of them are construction materials, rail line. I mean, I can tell you, in 2015, I wrote the tender for a Chinese company for Port Harcourt Maiduguri rail line. And my tender came in at $10.5 billion. Now, if you are going to be using one to finance it, it means you need 5 years if you had all that money for you. So that we will come to that as to adequacy of the money. Then you have other things like capital goods. Apart from capital goods, you have human resource development, training of people. If you get equipment, you go to get training as well. So you've got all that, and then you have foreign direct investment and foreign portfolio investment coming from China will also be calling on this money. Then, of course, you have the last one, which is consumer goods. And that's the most dangerous one, consumer goods. This money, $2 billion, is nothing. If you have frivolous imports in 1 month, they will consume this money. And that is really, and not to even talk of where we are likely to have credit explosion. And if you have a consumer credit explosion, you will see all that money head out to go and buy things from China and sell them in Nigeria. So that is the one that we will have to find time to talk about, because that raises the specter of bringing forex demand management in the context of this one. Otherwise, you will just exacerbate inflation if we don't consider that. Now, coming to the question of quantitative, that is the quantum of this money, which our president says is not enough. It's good that he intervened, because that is the level where you can get traction. I would have said that maybe central banks have all done all their negotiation and they've arrived at that, but when the president speaks, it's political intervention. So they can actually go back and look at this. But what are the quantum there? One is, if you look at our real GDP, if you take that as one basis, it's about $199.8 billion, call it 200. So that money sounds like 10% of it, 2 billion. Okay, but that is a very dangerous parameter to use. If you use the purchasing power parity, GDP purchasing power parity, Nigeria is $1.28 trillion. Now, that means that if you're taking 10% of it, you actually should be talking about $12.8 billion as the quantum of swap. Let's look at the third one. The third one is our trade volume between the two countries, $22.6 billion. Now, if you say, okay, you are trading, what sort of money do you think? It's just like taking a loan from bank, or maybe if you have a credit facility in the bank, you say, okay, 20% working capital, let's say 20% of that volume. That is $4.5 billion. So all of those will give you some idea of what the quantum could be. Definitely not 2 billion. It actually has to be anything around 5 billion to make sense. All right. So the president is right. All right,
absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Ife. And China has said that they are considering the president's advocacy for increase
in the amount for the currency swap. I want us to go to Mr. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister's visit to Nigeria. Part of his, part of the outcome of this meeting is to improve trade, investment, and infrastructural development. You touched on infrastructure and investment in infrastructure earlier on. However, yesterday we had a conversation around trade policy for Nigeria. How do we open conversations with countries like China and others who are willing to do business with Nigeria without having a trade policy that we work with about, or that serves as a framework for the agreement between both countries? Because it goes back again to we being able to maximize, trade relationships with other countries. Usually we come out being disadvantaged, and countries who are more, when it comes to their GDP, the size of their economy, have more advantage in that area, seem to walk away with a better deal. How can we rectify this so that we come out with something good, something that's beneficial, and something that's at least commensurate to our trade partners?
Well, in 2005 was the last trade policy that we wrote that was published. And now every 5 years we ought to have had one. In 2012, I was one of the 5 that wrote the trade policy for Nigeria, and I wrote the section on trade facilitation. Now, that was handled by Aganga and didn't get anywhere with it. Anyway, so what it is important that we have the trade policy to update it. And even the fact that we didn't have our trade policy mitigated, affected ECOWAS trade policy. Because we did ECOWAS regional trade policy, but Nigeria couldn't sign because we didn't have our own trade policy then. And then also, it could have affected our other things like common external tariff. But the fact of the matter is this: we do need that, but it is on a global scale. But if despite that limitation, let's face China, what we are discussing about, because I can tell you the aspect of the trade policy that would have been very, very critical for China. One of them is we have trade imbalance. So we have far more coming from China than from Nigeria. The objective is to try to come at parity with China on trade. So which means promoting more of our non-oil export into China. So we should be bolting down on China to make sure that they could accept all our products, even for our first 20 products to go in there. And even when we do JV, we make sure that part of the component of their liability is to take some of our products into their country if we are bringing in the measure. So that's one of them. The other one is dumping of goods. We are very, very concerned about dumping. Dumping is not just bringing in substandard goods. Dumping is worse than anything you can think of, because a country targets your manufacturing infrastructure and subsidizes the products in their country hitting your market. And that means, example, textile. They decimated all our textile industries in Kanu, in Kaduna, and Lagos, simply because of that predatory pricing. So the products are subsidized because Nigeria is #1 in the world about consuming clothes. Every Friday, the women will do the ashebi and all of that. We consume them. So they target the industry and they finish this your industry. So there are other products that are in the same category. And you know that there has been effort to encourage Nigerians to reduce what we import and then eat what we produce and produce what we, all that kind of stuff. But you are facing a big monster that has a lot of subsidies in particular tariff lines where they want to penetrate. And then you have a large population. So that's the area that I would. Then of course the other trade facilitation is very important, because 10% to 15% of international trade is lost to trade facilitation. Nigeria's trade is about 120 billion. So you can imagine over 15 billion being lost to trade facilitation, and who pays that is the private sector. So that's one of the things. The swap will help us to reduce that cost of transaction and then make the whole thing much more responsive. So those are some of the things that the trade policy would address when it comes to and I will say that the trade policy would promote this yuan as well as Pan-African payment system. Yes. Because why is important is that in Pan-African payment system we use Naira against Rand, and Rand So whatever we cannot get in our 2 billion, we can benefit from other countries that also have some. So it's important that we embrace that as well as directly with China.
All right, thank you so much, Professor. You're really going into some fantastic detail with this. Now, one of the concerns is similar to what we saw transpire in Argentina last year, when Argentina used their China currency swap facility to repay loans to IMF World Bank because they were about to default. Now, of course, we know our debt situation in the country currently. And some people are saying that, now with conversations around panda bonds, we already have the euro bonds and so forth. So some are saying, is this not a case of taking from Peter to pay Paul? Because in essence, we're not resolving the fundamental debt issue that we have. Now, what's your take on that?
Well, I wouldn't recommend that, even though, you see, within the special drawing rights of the IMF, countries that have their allocation, not just China will have a huge one, can I decide to make some of that special drawing rights available to Nigeria to help ease that loan repayment pressure. And that you could see that being used last year and 2 years ago when they went through that. We benefited over $3 billion from the special drawing rights. But here we have the need that we have is humongous. Look at infrastructure. We need, look, our president was crying about $50 billion to Africa. Africa needs $100 billion, exactly $93 billion every year for the next 10 years. Nigeria needs $20 billion or more every year for the next 5 years. So we need money. That $50 billion is nothing. Nigeria will swallow that in 2 years for our infrastructure, just infrastructure alone. And we have 30% stock of infrastructure compared to South Africa that's up 80%. So we need that.
If you'd allow me to interject, sorry, as you're elaborating, I just want you to add one point. Why does it have to come in the form of debt? Why are we not pushing for an investment drive? Why are we not pushing for public-private partnerships? Why is it that it seems the focus is on borrowing? That's where I was coming from with the issue of using this facility to pay for another facility.
No, I'm not recommending the use of the SDR, or which is the special drawing right, or the use of the swap resources for paying loans. I don't advocate that in any way. It will be self-defeatist. What we are saying is that we need more of that to facilitate trade and reduce trade costs, transaction costs. We need a lot more because infrastructure alone will consume, that $2 billion is nothing for the infrastructure that we need to do a rail line. We have so many rail lines we want to do. We have so many infrastructure projects. Then you come to capital, equipment that we need, agricultural equipment, manufacturing equipment, even the equipment, 80% of our manufacturing capacity in Nigeria is dependent on imported raw materials. So if we are importing raw materials from China, pharmaceutical products, our cars, knockdown parts that have to be assembled, we need money. That alone will take the money, and not to talk of consumer goods. Those guys, you allow that money there, all of us will run into trouble because they will chop it in 1 month. 1 month is not enough for frivolous import.
Okay.
So, and you can't bring debt into this at all.
Okay, Prof. We're talking about China-Nigeria currency swap and all of that. Well, why is Nigeria not a member of the BRICS? China is also in the BRICS. Brazil is there, Russia is there, other countries have just been admitted, many of them. South Africa is there. And you just mentioned a few minutes ago, international payment system, which is one of the objectives of BRICS. Is Nigeria not better off joining BRICS? And what are the challenges blocking us from being a member of BRICS?
Well, if you've had even the foreign minister from China reiterated their request for Nigeria to join. I don't think the issue is joining the BRICS is not a bad idea, but it doesn't remove the advantage that we gain from working with China directly on their currency. And then when you talk about a unified currency under the auspices of BRICS, the devil is in the detail, and the time is not tomorrow. Don't forget, in ECOWAS, how many years? Over 25 years, we've been on single ECOWAS currency. When we moved deadline from 1980-something, 2005, 2008, we've been moving it forever. And then when finally we thought we have arrived, France and Cote d'Ivoire did their come and see America wonder, and then we are back to drawing board. So it doesn't work out overnight. It will take time. But the immediate need is to have an expanded swap currency deal so that it could reduce the pressure that we are having. Just look at manufacturers. Have you ever tried now in the current dispensation? Everybody has run away from central bank because the rates have, they've closed the arbitrage. And so it's easier for you to go and buy the money from black market at almost the same rate and do your business. But for people who are importing raw materials for their products, for their manufacturing systems, and they're importing equipment and all of that, look at how long you have to wait before you can get access to the money and the dollar or whatever before you can import. But it is easier. Instead of taking you 1 year to order things, and you can do it in matters of weeks. I've got some Chinese companies that quoted equipment for me. And then I said, oh, but I don't have dollar. They said, Prof, don't worry. Just go to, I think, one bank like that and told me X transfer, which is yuan. So say, go and pay the Naira there. They have a Naira account under this scheme. So, it's swift. You save time. Time is money in international trade. It saves cost. Very, very important. Then it also expands the trade. All I'm saying that, please, let the trade expansion come from accepting Nigerian goods so that we can generate our own reserves of yuan from our export. And don't forget again that some of the Chinese people you might encourage them not to pay you in Naira, but pay you in yuan. And so that means our yuan scope increases. If some of those people begin to pay our imports in yuan rather than settle us in Naira, our yuan quantum will keep increasing. So we've got a lot of mileage in that. And then don't forget that they are the biggest trading partner to Nigeria, $22.6 billion in trade. So the easiest way for you to expand is to expand the trade already that you have with your partner. And there are no restrictions. There's no governance conditions. And it's not about loan, it is about what you use the loan to buy, which is you have got a loan, but you're going to use the loan to buy equipment from them. You're going to use the loan to pay for this and that. So how do you get advantage? So that money provides you opportunity to quickly buy the equipment that you have already wanted to buy, even though the loan may even come from other sources. But actually implementing becomes even harder when you don't have such an arrangement.
Well, thank you very much. You have answered
today.
Brilliantly. Thank you so much, Professor Ken Ife, for your time with us. Very insightful conversation this morning.